Before we get started, I want to share with you this brilliant sun that I'm looking at right now. Welcome to Sean's Thoughts, a podcast where I essentially talk whatever I want to talk about. And today, well, honestly, I'm uncertain what I'm actually going to talk about. Well, actually, I know what I'm going to start by talking about. I'm going to start talking about the anomaly with Rumble that I recently experienced. And it was that I simply tried to do a live stream and yet it wouldn't connect. Actually, what had happened is I opened up the app, I went to create, and everything was grayed out, meaning that I actually had no ability on my phone to even do anything. But I kind of bypassed that and I went into the original app. And then from there, I went into create. And then it did eventually bring up the actual place where I could, create a live stream on Rumble. And so, well, when I tried to actually start it, it said error. So how you doing today? If anyone should even arrive to share this auspicious moment with me, I'm not actually sure exactly what that word means, yet I'm glaring right now, absorbed by these beautiful orange flowers that are across the table from me. Actually, I'm going to sit, in front of them in a little bit, but I always love to, ground myself, stand while I start to talk and, really get into the tune of things. See, I've spent a lot of time on my podcast talking about a lot of different things, topics such as alternative world history and, potentially what things could be. Now I remember the thing that I wanted to share today. And yeah, actually, I was actually in my bathing routine where I tend to, be still, be, connected and such. And oftentimes I have lots of interesting thoughts that come into my mind of what I could think about, what I should think about. And well, today's thought that I was wanting to talk about was something that's super, super interesting, at least to me. See, we live in a world where, we have been convinced, perhaps many, so maybe not all, that we are in a world where things are evenly distributed. The playing field is level for everyone to play. And yet it has become apparently obvious that perhaps that's not the case. And what I mean by that is you only have to, like, for most people, go out and look outside and see the number of people who are actually, you know, not on that level playing field. And yet there's a portion of society that has expectations that somehow these people, they contributed to not playing by the rules. And see, that's something that I've often come up against. The idea that I had to play by the rules, that I had to do what I was being told I had to do, be a good cog in the system and, produce and, contribute to the taxation and, do all that normal stuff, as some people would say. But yet I've always felt compelled all my life to kind of like draw outside of the lines. See, I don't mean just color outside of the lines. I mean actually just completely step outside the lines, grab my marker, and then start creating my own ideas of what could be. Because I've always felt that, the ways that the game and I'll really call life is but a game, or as Shakespeare said, life is but a stage. The theater that we're all playing has a set of rules that never really jived with me. I always felt that, there was more. So even since I was 12 years old, I had a job and I was working and I was, grinding to make money because I came from a family that didn't really have a lot of money. Actually, my mother, she had, I think, up to 8 paper routes that my brothers and sister, we would actually help her deliver. And that's essentially how we would make ends meet. We would, deliver newspapers. And we wouldn't always deliver them. Actually, occasionally when my mom didn't feel well or something happened, those papers, they actually went into the shed and we would miss sometimes an entire, you know, we'd have an entire like couple hundred papers that were undelivered simply because, you know, delivering newspapers for a mother of 5 was a very challenging thing to accomplish. So when I was 12 and I had the opportunity to work with this man named Rick and sell chocolate bars, I did it. I jumped for it. I actually was a very great salesperson, and I essentially was able to, at 12 years old, buy my own TV, and I bought my own Nintendo entertainment system, and I bought my own stereo, and I joined the CD club where you can get 12 CDs for the price of one and then have to forever be stuck buying overpriced CDs. Actually, I joined it like under 3 different names. I used my different middle names as new names, and I had, Jonathan Peterson, and I had Colin Peterson and Shawn Pederson, and we all had accounts, and I actually had them at one point in time being sent to my grandmother's house because, I really loved music, and I was always trying to find a way in order to kind of have what everyone else had, and be like they were, like have the shoes and have the clothing, but yet I never really needed to have that stuff. Essentially, after I started to earn my own money and realized there was kind of more important things for me to buy than, clothes with a brand logo on it. Although in grade 8, I did get a pair of Buffalo jeans. It was at some sort of Boxing Day sale. And when they wore out, I actually did take that logo and hand stitch it onto the back of my new pair of jeans, which was some no-name brand. And, people thought that was amazing because I had the newest, latest, greatest Buffalo jeans, now black. But, they weren't. And I was faking it. And there's a lot of people out there that are truly faking it. They're people, some of them are just looking to get by. Other people want to keep up with the Joneses. Other people, feel shame and worry that they aren't seen or that perhaps they're even being talked about. And, that fear of being talked about is a very important concern. As I talked about in my podcast yesterday, people project when they talk, especially when it's negative about us. And so when we're on the minds of those people that are around us, oftentimes I'd probably, imagine staying out of their radar screen, staying off of their viewfinder, staying off of their targeting, scope, so that we didn't necessarily have to go through that. And as a child, being 12 years old, I started to see that materialism. I started seeing that imbalance in how the world worked. I watched my friends have all these wonderful things, and yet I didn't. But I was able to become stronger by that because I wasn't willing to just accept what I was given or what I was handed out to me. And when I mean handed out, I stood in the line with my family and we went to the food bank and I actually worked at the food bank. I do have a video called I Am of God, and it's an introduction to who I am. And I've talked a lot of things in there. And, I guess I'm in a sense called to, and I'm going to step into the camera now because that's the big change. Hi, how you doing? That's the big change of what I'm wanting to do nowadays is I want to be in front of the camera or as opposed to behind the camera because I realized that at a time when I first started creating these videos, I did really feel an overwhelming amount of projections placed upon me. And I've recognized that, not everyone out there wants us all to succeed. And when I mean us, I mean the Homo sapiens, yes, but I also mean just people in general. They often, feel that they're needing to keep up. And if someone moves a few 2 steps ahead of them, then they're wanting to pull them back. And, that was even the case, I guess you could say, when it came into being in high school and going through all those peer pressure social groups and, not wanting to sit there and just, criticize other people. I never realized me not wanting to join in, bringing other people down, even if they weren't there. I wasn't that type of person who wanted to, down talk people, especially when they walked away. But yet I grew up in a family with, my mom and her aunts and, or sorry, her sisters and other people, and my grandmother sitting around the table smoking cigarettes, complaining about so many different things, including each other, especially sometimes when people walked out of the room. And I heard it all. Like I kind of picked up on a lot of things. And, I was always the inquisitive person. I asked honest questions and I got told, be quiet or stop being a know it all or, a lot of other things. And essentially what that did was it programmed me to lose my confidence in a sense. Yet even with all of those hardships, we'll call them, they essentially became trials and they became, parts of me where I was able to excel past them. That idea of the phoenix coming out of the ashes. I think I did that several different times through my life. I just kept, moving forward regardless of the adversities that stood in front of me because there are things that I wanted to experience, do, feel. Feeling is a very important one. Feeling, I think all parts of feeling, from the wonderful feelings to the challenging feelings. I wanted to truly feel and I wanted to experience. See, when I was in college, Douglas College exactly, and Simon Fraser University, I had decided that I didn't want to stay in school any longer. I wanted to go backpack. So I, just jumped up, made all the plans, joined a social network where I could meet people from all over China and Japan and such. And I got on an airplane and I left. I didn't worry so much about, not having or what could happen. I had many, many different situations when I was over there that I was uncertain about where I would sleep that night. So much so that I actually, when I was backpacking in Seoul, Korea, I ended up staying in well, called it a love hotel. I didn't recognize it at the time. In fact, I was at the counter and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd been on the train looking for a hotel that was reasonable in price, couldn't find it. So I ended up seeing a flashing light that I kind of understood as a hotel. And I was standing at the front counter, and the guy behind the counter, he wouldn't speak English to me, but I just kept, doing my best to, speak the little bit of Korean that I knew. 안녕하세요. And anyways, so I essentially pushed my way into wanting to stay because I didn't want to go back out into the streets of Seoul at 2 o'clock in the morning, especially when there was a hotel and there was obviously vacancy. And so there was a time where this old man, this old Korean man, he was sitting behind me, and I noticed that he essentially, after all my persistence, he dropped the newspaper, he nodded his head and then brought the newspaper up right out of a mafia movie. And it probably was exactly that. And so then they allowed me to stay in the room. It wasn't all that expensive, but the room, oh my gosh, it was mirrors and videos and a glass bathroom. You could, of course, imagine what all that stuff's for. And yeah, it was a fantastically beautiful room that I was able to have that sleep that night in. And, it's been a story that I've held with me all this time about persistence and about, positive attitude. I didn't ever get angry. I was just, I need a room to sleep kind of idea. And eventually it worked out for me. And so all my life, I've always found opportunities in persistence. And, even that's what my channel here at New Earth Creations is all about: persistence. It's persistence in, creating a channel that can help other people, but it's also just creating, my ability to share the work and the creations that I do. Actually, I'm working with this new app right now on YouTube. It's something that recently just came out, and I'm able to share these very creative videos. And although they are AI created, yes, they are essentially, I'm the creative director. Those thoughts are mine. They're coming into form through the sentences, the words, the ideas, the concepts. Even a lot of the original imagery comes from my own photography. You can definitely see that video of the dog. That was, my family's dog. And we used it as a model for the picture to create the dog jumping through the window of a car, which by the way, was my car. It had its window smashed, vandalized, and it gave me a wonderful opportunity to learn how to replace a window myself, which I think is a very important thing going forward, that we, and me, of course, have those experiences essentially to regain our sovereignty. And we regain our sovereignty, or at least I'm planning on it and I'm doing it, by learning to do things ourselves. And even this whole podcast experience that I've had, I've learned how to do things myself, all the way from the original recording of the videos. And you'll see in some of my older videos where, I just took still images, and then those still images, they upgraded into, a little more three-dimensional moving type of images. And then I learned how to do the fading, and then I learned how to, do more editing. And from the editing, I learned how to, make a really nice video with good intros, good outros. I learned my experience in branding from my time with the brick, and I learned how to, essentially tag those moments where, images of New Earth creations, for example, at the end of my videos is an important way. And then I went on to learn how to create effective titles and increase the amount of audience by adding metadata in so that I could help YouTube. And I truly do look at it as helping YouTube. I recognize that, there are forces out there, like the ones who, for instance, are perhaps affecting what is happening to this video and to other videos. But yet, as I've said, I trust in God and I have faith that these videos are essentially protected, that my channel is, watched upon by far more beings than we could ever imagine. And so those people that are thwarting my ability to be expressive, to share my thoughts and share my ideas, things happen all for a reason. And when we do things that essentially harm or impose our whatever it is we want to call it on other people, there is a karmatic balance, I believe. There are actually, someone referred to it as the quickening, if that makes sense to you. That which we do to others, it essentially comes back to us kind of idea. And well, you know, I continue to move forward. I continue to learn, grow, and excel, because really, that's all we can do. We can always reach for being better. There isn't a finish line to really anything. Yes, there comes a time where we decide we give up and, we surrender to whatever it is we choose to surrender to. But yet, in essence, quite often, I think that it becomes more of a choice. It's a choice to, lay down and let the car drive over you. And I have honestly no desire to step any even 1 inch away from God. And for me, God is the source of all things. God right now is in these flowers. God is within the grass. God is within this microphone. That God is within me. I am of God, as I've mentioned before. God is actually in this rock as well. And interestingly enough, that I segue into this, because this is a stone that I actually procured or, picked up when I was in China in 2003. And I was walking on the original part of the so-called Great Wall of China. And I, wanted a souvenir, so I brought home this. Now, many people nowadays, anyways, they get to see the newly renovated version of the China Wall. But yet I was actually able to go out far out into the countryside and go into the more remote areas where they use plastic for windows, where their houses were made of clay, where restaurants were basically small garages. They weren't, nice restaurants. So I've definitely had the opportunity to see this disparity that I was essentially talking about in the beginning of the podcast. And so this rock is supposedly like thousands of years old. And it was, part of this mammoth-sized wall that, people kind of debate whether or not which side was the wall facing. But nonetheless, I had the opportunity to take those leaps, those belief and use my lonely planet and find the amazing places in this planet that I wanted to go. And I've always felt that that's what life is really about. Life is about experiencing. And that's truly why when I put on the podcast the other day and I was talking about relationships, see, we get stuck into this idea that life is about routine and structure and organization and, following the system and, living, marrying, having children, retiring, and dying. When I truly do believe that life is about walking on the China Wall, life is about sleeping outside the temples of Tikal in Guatemala, walking on newly formed ground in the big island of Hawaii, where the volcano had recently erupted a few years ago, and there's newly formed ground that I'm walking on that only a few years ago was the freaking ocean. Also, one of the most amazing experiences I've had was being in the open ocean off of the coast of the Baja Peninsula with my mother when I took her down to Mexico, and being in the ocean in a paddle boat, a rather large paddle boat, and reaching over to the paddle boat when a whale came up to us. We didn't go chasing it. It came up to us and it allowed me to pet it. So I petted a whale in the open ocean because the whale came to me, not just me, but to our boat. And, amazing experiences. And I truly do believe that's what life is about. It's about experiencing things, standing within the energy, such as my brother and I did around the Stonehenge. And there's so many other places that I truly do want to visit, but yet, there are reasons why that hasn't happened yet. And I'm perfectly okay because God has a divine plan for us all. And I really do say for us all, even those who are watching for other reasons than actually just enjoying the stuff that I'm talking about. Because there's reasons why all of us are here, regardless of the part that we played in this whole sitcom or this melodrama that we call our political theater. Actually, it's so much political theater that there's this amazingly funny guy. I suddenly forgot his name, but he's that guy who has orange hair and orange beard and stuff. He did this amazing video that I watched on Rumble today that showcased he was playing a part of like the script writer for the political theater of the world right now. And it was amazingly funny. And it really does exemplify the comical nature of the world that we live in right now and how, so many people are getting caught up into all these narratives that are just outrageous. In the same month, we're talking about so many things from alien invasions and, I won't even go into all of it. Maybe if I find a way, I'll post the video. It kind of works on YouTube so much, but not as much Rumble. But anyways, well, I'm not even streaming on Rumble right now, so, I might not even be streaming at all. But I'm okay with that because everyone who's walked by me right now, everyone who's within my vocal distance, even if they don't hear the exact words that I'm saying, I know that, the presence and the ideas and, thoughts are ideas. And I believe thoughts are like things that float around in the air, and that we have this thing in our head called a pineal gland. And they've actually shown that it is a transmitter. That means it sends signals out, and a receiver, meaning that it receives signals in. And as I once talked about when I went to Science World, they've already showed us that our brain waves can affect things to move. So you can connect right there that, we are walking around in a world where even our thoughts necessarily aren't our thoughts. We could be picking up on someone else's thoughts. And, those thoughts could be good or bad. Actually, I have a future podcast that I wanted to do talking about possibilities. I want to bring back that podcast. Possibilities was my original idea for a podcast where I would come up with these ideas and then essentially, kind of brainstorm them out, ask myself and investigate and kind of, have a conversation with myself about, is this possible? And so I wanted to do a new first episode of my returning podcast series, Possibilities, about what ideas are, because there's three main ideas. And if you want to watch that video, if and when I do it in the future, I'll link it here perhaps. If I don't, remind me so that when I do, I can come back and do it. Let me know on the timestamp where it is. I often talk so much about all the videos I want to do and the ones I have done, and I do my best on YouTube to index them on little cards. But unfortunately, on Rumble, they don't have that access or that ability to do that. But, anyways, um, yeah, I lost my train of thought because I'm watching the seagull just like go for a walk. But seriously, um, yeah, there are so many different experiences out there. And I would love to get together with people that were, aligned and in love with life, so much so that perhaps together we could go off and explore different aspects of what our world is currently offering, regardless of the propaganda, the fear, and the turmoil that is or has perhaps been advertised, we'll call it, on mainstream media and such, and actually alternative media as well. When I pop onto Rumble to see my videos, for example, after I upload them, I often notice most of the thumbnails are quite fear driven. So even while they're essentially, promoting the positive aspects about free speech and such, which is so important, a great part of discussion is being able to converse about things. There still is a lot of fear that's being shared. And, I get it. I understand because it's all about getting views. It's all about getting promotions. It's all about, getting that view count and that number of view hours and all this other stuff in order to prosper off of YouTube and Rumble. But yet that's something I never ever worried about. And I know we've talked about like 10,000 different subjects yet, but take what's good for you and leave all the rest behind. Because this last part that I'm going to conclude with, and I hopefully, not hopefully, I trust this message is going to go out. And anything or anyone who tries to prevent it, there are consequences to everything we do in life. And, I recognize that. I respect that. I understand that. Like I said in my podcast yesterday, I realized that a lot of the reason why my channel has been so, challenging was perhaps it was partly to do with how I was projecting on myself and the world around me. And so back to what I was saying before, I've created, as I've mentioned oftentimes, an amazing community. And now, while the community is just in its fledgling state with a few members, I created this community so that we could unite like Autobots. Actually, that didn't sound like Optimus, but Autobots roll out. No, still didn't sound like it. Anyways, Autobots. And now that I'm doing it in front of a camera, I can't seem to do it properly. But anyways, I created this amazing community because I have aspirations and I would love to get together with like-minded souls and those who are looking just to experience and love life and ripple that energy and, travel the world, experience, make love, and not just in, as I said, the sexual part, but make love and as in create those close encounters, those close experiences. One of the greatest things when you have an experience with groups of people or with anyone overall, you really become closer when you share common experiences. And so I really look forward to getting together with gals and guys and dolls. Yeah, that was a play that I once did, but getting together with guys and dolls and, going out into this beautiful world and finding those wondrous experiences that we can share and grow stronger from. And them being experiences means that they don't have to be lifelong full-time commitments to, being one group who's going to go everywhere. If we get into a situation where, we have a couple people, a couple more add together and, it's a cohesive group, it works well together. People may go off on their own ways, but yet I would love to experience a more nomadic life and show my son, for example, all of the beautiful, amazing places that I saw all around Japan and all over China and, well, everywhere that I've went. I want to show and share all of that with, well, all of you who want to come along with me. So definitely consider, you know, supporting my work. And I think that that's an important key. I'm not asking, as someone, told me in the comments, that I'm asking people to give me money. I'm asking people to support the work that I do, because the work that I am doing is, divinely aligned and guided, as many of the other people that are creating similar channels to me. We are essentially doing God's work, the source of all things, and sharing the things that we know. Like, I watched this really cool video by this channel called Mspiracy, and it was about the place called Tartaria and the supposed or possible empire that was across of our entire planet. It might have actually been parts of it in Moose Jaw, in Victoria, in Ontario, in London, in Washington D.C., and we'll just keep going to all these different places. Even Shanghai, when I was there, they had a lot of buildings that were kind of really old. And when I was down in Chicago, the same thing. There was a kind of a lot of buildings that were really old. When I was in Belize, there was a kind of lots of buildings that were really old. And these buildings, they look very, very similar in their architecture. So one of the amazing things that's happening right now in our world is that people are able to learn more about the possibility that the history wasn't as what we had been led to believe. And I think that that's fundamentally awesome, cool. And I really want to go out there and I want to see things for myself. So if you want to see things for yourself and, you have a dream, well, let's make that dream come together. And so I'm going to leave it right there. And as I said, mwah. Actually, the interesting thing about this rock, I met my former wife, and I say former because the relationship's over, on the day that I found this rock. On the first day I went to China, I got that rock, or at least that's how I remember it. Anyways, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.